She said, that was my promise. That brought joy to me. The Father is in the home. Guests are in the home. Friends are in the home. There's sorrow in the home. But I want to show you something in this little mother. This little mother was not going to sit around and feel sorry for herself. She was not going to accept things as they were. There was something in her said that this was a promise. And this was a gift of God. And this brought joy. And I'm not just going to sit here and take it. But there's something in me that says I'm going to get what I want. And I'm going to go to the man who made the promise to me. So she turns to her husband and she says, send me to Carmel where the preacher is. But he was like a lot of church folks that I know. He just said, it's not new moon and it's not Sabbath. In other words, every setting has to be appropriate and right before we can have any kind of a religious service. But Mama said it doesn't have to be Sabbath and it doesn't have to be new moon. I've got something in my soul that says I'm going to get a hold of that preacher that made this promise. And I will not take no for an answer. But I'm going to get a hold of the preacher until I get an answer from this God. So she made her way to Carmel. And when she was at the base of Carmel, she said to the servant that was with her, you stay here. And she began to ascend the mountain. And Elisha, the man of God, was at the top of the mountain, and he looked down. And he said to Gehazi, here comes that Shunammite woman. And God must have withheld something from me. But he said, Gehazi, run down the hill and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with thy husband? And is it well with thy child? And Gehazi trotted down the hill. And he met the little Shunammite mother on the way up. And he said, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with thy child? And she said, it is well. How could she say it is well when her heart was throbbing? When her child's corpse was laying on the prophet's bed at home and there was not breath within the child. How could she say it well? Because there was faith in her heart that said, if I can get to the top of this mountain, if I can reach the man who gave me the promise, if I can touch him, if I can speak to him, my child will live again. I'm preaching to someone today about prevailing prayer. You may be in your valley. You may be in your night. You may be suffering with loss. But if there's faith born in you that says, I will not be denied. I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to knock till I get some bread. I'm going to hold on to God till I get what God is going to give me. If you have that kind of faith and that kind of tenacity and holding power, God will bless you when you prevail against the powers of darkness. Something to be said for prevailing prayer. Holding on to God. I understand that kind of praying. If you don't mind, I just walk around. I feel more comfortable when I'm doing that. I alluded to the fact that I'd pastored one congregation for 30 years in California. After Louisville conference in 2001, and I was elected, I went back. I had not left the church yet. I was still pastoring. And I remember I learned a long time ago that I could not pastor without prayer. There were hundreds of people that depended upon me. And I could not lead them. I could not minister to them. I could not feed them. I could not be their shepherd if I did not pray. And so I would often go most every day. Maybe not every day, but close to it. I would leave my office, which was in the front, and I would walk into that massive sanctuary that was like a football field long and seated over 2,000 people. And there wasn't one window in that church. So I could pray in that room and nobody knew who I was. I wasn't going to be bothered. I just talked to God and walked around, and the Holy Ghost would come down. I'd hear other folks in there praying. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who I was. But we were talking to God. And I remember that one morning when, as I prayed and walked in the back of the church, that the door in the front, one of the doors into the hallway, opened. And when it opened, there was a light in the hallway, and I could see this much, that the person that walked in that room was a man. And that man come right over to the front section, and he fell down at a pew. And in moments, he was travailing and crying and convulsing and shaking and weeping. And I could hear his cry and knew that his soul was in anguish. So I stood in the back and I said, Jesus, help that man. Help him, help him, help him. And I did this for a while and lifted my hands toward him. Finally, as he continued with no relief, I walked down the side of the church. I walked over and I knelt down beside him and I put my arm around him. And only then did I recognize the man. He was not a member of my church. He was a missionary of the United Pentecostal Church. And I recognized him, so I began to pray with him. We were in spiritual warfare together, and we were praying and praying and praying. And after maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes, I felt that burden begin to lift. He felt that burden begin to lift. The victory seemed to come in that room, and we both stood up. His countenance looked different. There was relief. There was victory. I said, Brother Walmer, he was a missionary that had served for 25 years in Brazil. I said, Brother Walmer, could you share with me what your burden was? He said, well, Brother Haney, it's my family. Now, he had a daughter that attended our church and her husband. I didn't know if he had other children. So I knew that he had family. Well, he left. We parted, and it wasn't maybe a week and a half later than on a Wednesday evening in service, as we were all gathering in and the praise singers were worshiping and lead us in worship, that one of our young ladies in the church come walking in, and behind her was a young man, and they sat down about middle way, and he didn't really pray or worship, but he was very respectful. She prayed, she worshiped. At the close, often on Wednesday nights, it made it family night after I finished Bible study or teaching or preaching or whatever I was doing that night. I always brought the entire church that would come into the front just to stand. We would close the service, and I invited everybody down. She came, and he followed. He stood there. He did not really pray, but he was respectful again. He left. I said to someone after service, who was that young man with so-and-so tonight? And I said, well, his name is Stephen Walmer, and he is the son of the missionary. He lives in the city, and at noon today, she left her place of work, went to the next place somewhere right close by over to get something, and he waited on her and found out who she was, and she invited him to come to church, and he came. He was the son of this missionary that had been praying. He come back on Sunday a week later, and that night God gloriously filled him with the Holy Ghost. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a prayer answering God, and there's something to be said for prevailing prayer that gets a hold of God.